Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Financial Security 2020 and this webinar. I'm Ida Rademacher. I lead the Financial Security Program at the Aspen Institute, and for the past 5 years, our program has been deeply probing the most pressing financial challenges that families in the US are grappling with. We've worked with many hundred of stakeholders to help build a robust understanding of the dimensions and drivers of these challenges of income volatility, consumer debt, rising costs of housing and dependent care, the lack of retirement savings for over 40 million Americans, and the fraying connection between work and wealth. We've also worked with the same partners and many others to size those problems and to solve for them at scale with both market and policy innovation and solutions. And to all of you who have already been partners on this journey with us, thank you. We've learned from you. We look forward to working with you in the years to come. And for those of you we've yet to engage with directly, thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to becoming partners with you in the future. I talked about the past 5 years, but over the past year, we've had the exceptional opportunity to look back over all of the work and the issues that we've been working on and distill out a new framework for what it will take to truly support household financial security. And we've also crafted a list of priorities for where we think we should begin. Last week, we released our new Financial Security 2020 report. And the diagnosis and prescriptions we've arrived at, they're not markedly different because of 2020 and the exceptional kind of year it's been in terms of the pandemic and the political and economic and racial reckoning we're all experiencing. The report's not different because of that, but it's more urgent. The issues are more urgent. They compel us all as leaders to think differently about how we work, about who we work with, and about how we make solving for financial security a top national priority that will not only strengthen households, but also strengthen our economy, strengthen our democracy, and quite frankly, our realization, our ability to realize the dream of America as a place of equal opportunity for all. I'd like to thank all of our program's funders for investing in our ability to pursue our mission so fully over the last 5 years. And in particular today, I'd like to thank Citi Foundation for supporting this special financial security report and event. And speaking of the event, now my job to get out of the way and go get ready for the next segment. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Joanna Smith-Romani, who is today's MC and is also the managing director of the Financial Security Program. My partner, my co-conspirator, my friend. Joanna, you look fabulous. Thanks for joining us and take it away.
Thank you so much, Ida. I am so excited to be here, everyone. And not just because it brought me into the office where I haven't been since March, and not just because I put on makeup and hair product and my pink jacket, but because my 5-year anniversary actually of being with Aspen was earlier this week. And I feel like we've gone far, but not even remotely enough. And as Ida said, we're in a place of urgent times. We're in a place where families are in trouble in this country. And there are over 500 of you that decided to join us today. And I'll be clear about my expectations with all of you, which for those of you that know me is no surprise that I'm clear about my expectations. This isn't a kind invitation to join us. This is a calling for all of you to join us in this work and to bring your friends. This truly, we keep saying this will take all of us, but I hope as you've read the paper and as we get through the arc of today, you'll realize why it will take all of us and why this work is urgent, essential, needs to be now, and we need to be accountable for making progress on it. And by the way, is actually doable. I have great optimism, hope, and real, what's the word? Like knowledge, I don't know how the right way to say it, but is in the leaders on this call and the leaders that we work with, and the huge leadership in community for knowing what they need and letting us work with them to get us all there together. So let's get on with the program. I'm reflecting too much on my 5 years at Aspen and my fancy pink blazer. And let me quickly tell you what we have in store for you. Stay on for the whole time. Come back and view it later if you wanted to re-see a part that you thought was important. Share the video with your friends, but this is what we're going to do over the next 90 minutes together. First, Ida's going to come back, but this time be joined by Brandy McHale from City Foundation. And they, as two really esteemed folks in our field, are going to say, what have we learned and done in the past 5 years? And importantly, gosh, like, what didn't we know that now we know that has to be part of our future work in the next 5? So that will be a really, I think, important, grounding, reflective conversation for us. Then I am so delighted that my colleague, Genevieve Milford, who's the Director of Insights and Evidence at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program, she's the brains behind this framework, and she's going to give us a Reader's Digest version. It doesn't mean you don't need to read it. It just means she's going to guide you through it of how to understand this framework that ultimately the real point of is to help us understand the real financial lives, the lived experiences of families in this country. Then it's panel time. I will be with you throughout the day, but I will definitely be back for panel time where I'll be moderating a session with 4 exceptional leaders. That's going to take us out of how this could be at a high level to what is the applied version of this, and how do we actually take these insights and turn them into real impact for families in this country. And then last, and please stay with us until the end, we are just so lucky to have Danielle Christine Toussaint join us. She's a colleague at our Ascend program at Aspen. And she's going to get a little personal with us, which is what we all need to do, is get personal with ourselves, reckon with ourselves, and say to us, what is my role in this? What is my responsibility? And no matter where I sit and what my job is and what my day job is, what can I do to make this country a better place for everyone? Really quick, please feel free to chat in the chat with each other when ideas come up. Unfortunately, we can't take live questions, and we're doing live tweeting throughout. So chat in the chat, use hashtag Aspen FSP Live to have discussions on the Twitter universe that many of you know about. And let's have fun, because we're going to get this done one way or another, and let's make it be as enjoyable, fun, innovative, exciting as possible. Okay, I'm going to stop babbling. I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to turn it on to Ida and Brandy. Thank you guys so much, and enjoy the next conversation.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and welcome again, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and joining us. I'm Ida Rademacher. I'm the Executive Director of the Financial Security Program at the Aspen Institute, and I am delighted to be here for the next chunk of time with my good friend and mentor, Brandy McHale. Brandy is now leads city investing, community investing and development, and is the president of the City Foundation. And truth be told to everybody, she's been a long time somebody I've admired for the work and have gotten to work with closely, both here at Aspen and in my prior work at Prosperity Now, where you chaired our board. So thanks for joining me today, Brandy.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, I remember deciding to come to Aspen and talking to you about that switch a little over 5 years ago. And part of that was for the overall financial security field. We felt like Aspen was an important platform that had been being utilized for a lot of retirement conversations, but was relatively under-leveraged for a broader conversation about how do you actually build financial security for households. And so we all had ambitions for how we were going to use the knowledge and the networks at Aspen to help advance and push this field. The world was different when we did that. And so we get to come back together now, and you've really supported the work this year to help us think about what we've learned over the last 5 years. And that's what this conversation is going to be about. It's what have we learned, what's different in the world, what's different in the field, what's different in our own sense of leadership. And that's kind of how we'll stack our conversation together today. So first off, just welcome. And is there anything overarching you want to say at the beginning about the way that you see this work in the world right now?
You know, one of the hardest questions I've been asked over the years, and you, Ida, have asked me yourself, is how do we really know that we're making a difference, that we're moving the needle? And I think at times it can feel a little bit like we're treading water, And certainly the waters of the past few years have gotten very choppy. There's a lot of churn in the water. It is not smooth sailing by any means. I think just to continue that analogy, if I look back on the 2 decades that I've been engaged in this work, we've what I love about this field and the financial security field is that it's very adaptable. It's not a straight line. We have a theory of change, but that theory of change always needs to be adapted and modified because the environment has changed so much. We've been working in this field during times of extremely low employment levels, and we've been working during times of extremely high employment levels. We've been working during a time when the issues facing our communities have been front and center uh,
Yeah.
and more present, and times where it's been the bottom of the list. So lots of change happening around us, super adaptable. But for me, I feel like we've come full circle in a way. When I started this work very early on, it really was first also about building education and awareness. What was the challenge that was facing households? Why were families not getting ahead? Why was there such an increasing sense of financial insecurity and a lack, frankly, of empowerment? And then we became very focused on, so what are the tactics that we need to take? What are the interventions? What do we need to learn about how to actually change the trajectory for specific households? And we became really focused on direct service innovations. And I feel like we're coming full circle and recognizing that we need to now do both. We need to both be innovators in terms of programming, but we need to continue to build the education and awareness and marry these two together. And so when I started many years ago in the philanthropy field, in the community development space, I look back 25 years ago, and a lot of those grants were actually to support community organizing.
Mm.
And as I fast forward to today, realizing that we're investing once again, we don't call it community organizing, but really doubling down on community change agents. And that it is so important for us to be investing both in the direct service work and the advocacy work. And that's why we've been so happy to work with you and work with the Financial Security Project at Aspen, because you've had a leadership role in both of those areas, evaluating, guiding, advising on innovations, but also raising up the issues.
Yeah. I think about some of the ways the world is different and some of the ways the world is the same. And I tend to think right now in terms of three big reveals, that are happening. When I came here a few years ago, it was very much to say issues of financial security, household financial security, are fundamental to a robust economy. And so how do you make issues of financial security a top national priority? They always, you always everybody expresses how important it is, but at the end of the day, when you maybe get 2 or 3 priorities, it tends to slide off in terms of the real reforms that would need to happen to ensure that households have consistent stability that enables that upward mobility, right? The choices that people get to take. So that was the work for a few years here, was really how do you actually produce the issues of household experiencing financial insecurity in a way that made that a priority for leaders to act on. Fast forward to right now, right? We're 7 months, almost 8 months into a COVID pandemic, which has precipitated an economic depression, a series of racial inequities that are at the surface. These were all issues I feel like we were fighting to make headlines. And now it's very much the case that they are the headlines that are driving everybody's questions about what to do next. So, in that sense, we do now need to pivot, I think, to, well, so what do we do about it? And I do feel like in some ways, that's where the financial security field has a lot of answers that are relevant to many others. Would you say that's kind of someplace where you go?
Yeah, no, I think so. So 2 things. I can remember us having lots of conversations and doing lots of work together to get the racial wealth gap identified, and then to continue to raise awareness of what is it and why is it here, and unpack the factors that have led to the persistent gap. Now we used to say, right, well, if we could only get this in the national discourse, well, it's in the national discourse now. But I think we're at a point where we need to do two things. One is not just to frame this as a problem to be solved.
Yeah.
There are definitely, areas where we do need to address that. But I think it's also about an opportunity to be seized. Because the other thing that's really different is that we are going through two kinds of I think of revolutions in this country. One is just a demographic change that I don't think anybody had fully expected, that the demographics of our country are changing so dramatically. So if you are a leader in the private sector and you're not watching what's happening with demographics and you don't care about the racial wealth gap, my feeling is you will not be a company that is going to be successful in the future. The other thing that's happening is we're coming from a period of incredible technological innovation and a technological revolution, but I also think we're in the midst of a social revolution where nobody, for whatever political ideology you come from, nobody is happy with the status quo. So I think we have this incredible moment that's both an awareness of the issues that are front and center and a lack of willingness to just allow this trajectory to continue the same way it has. But there's also a lot of divisiveness. And I think we need to go back to almost where we started around education and awareness. It's not a fail that we have to get there. We have to set that foundation. And when we have the education and awareness, then we get the support so what are the specific changes and the interventions? And I know it can feel frustrating, like how much more awareness do we have to build? But it's I think that's okay. I think we have to I think we're getting out of our echo chamber. And I think that's really important.
Well, I think maybe it's awareness 2.0, 3.0. That's even a very dated way of saying it, because we've talked about this before too, but we can unpack it here. One of the things that we've been doing at Aspen is systematically identifying the financial challenges facing households, right? And so we'd always worked on retirement and security issues and the lack of like long-term financial security issues. But then we backed up and we said, let's spend, with our EPIC process, we're going to spend 2 years understanding the dimensions and drivers of income volatility, how that's changed in people's lives, and how to solve for that. Big time on consumer debt and understanding the stack of debt and how that looks different for different households and how to address that. Now we're looking really hard at housing affordability and stability as a key aspect of financial security, right, in people's lives. And one of the things you've said is, in terms of awareness, it's not so much that we need to continue to build out the verticals next. It's that we need to build awareness around the horizontals. And maybe you can say a little bit more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I guess if there's one thing that I could say when I sum up my career, it's that unfortunately there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all approach that's going to work here. And that we need to think about not just building, as you said, or I've said in the past, one vertical and innovate within that vertical. It's not about what we do. Sometimes it's also about how we work together. Look, we are in a resource scarce environment right now. We do not have a robust, booming economy. We do not have endless amounts of subsidy available. We are living in a time where scarcity is going to have to drive a different kind of innovation. It's going to have to drive an innovation, again, and not just what we do, but how we work together. And so that's one piece. So I think fields are coming together. I think, we've talked, the pandemic has shown how health and financial health, how medical health, physical health, and financial health are inextricably linked clearly, and economic health overall. There's a connection there. I think there's a huge connection in terms of climate change and looking at what's happening on the climate front and what's happening and who's going to bear the brunt of that. And what this really all comes down to is, so one is, I think we have a chance to partner with other fields, but the way we partner sometimes I don't think doesn't necessarily have to be that we actually partner together on a direct service effort. We have to have our individual sectors and our specialties and our expertise. But I think the chance to work horizontally also is about infusing a focus on equity. I think in our space, in the economic opportunity space, we've really come to see that equity is really critical, that it's not a rising tide lifts all boats, that we've got to be very intentional and focus on really on leveling the playing field for population segments who have been left out.
Yeah. It connects to your organizing point too, in terms of harkening back, because I think, we end up in the report that we're putting out in conjunction with this event. Not only is there this framework that Genevieve's going to come on next and really just unpack kind of what we think really does drive financial security for a household and how that impacts, how that ricochets through an economy. But we also come away with a set of principles and priorities, I think, for where we go next. And one of those that's come out of the moment we're in, but also speaks to what you just said about how we partner differently and how we think about equity, is power. And who has a voice at the table in terms of helping to shape and influence the solution set? And how do we build for the margin to be addressed and not the kind of common denominator of some, I feel like that has been one of the things where it's been about build a product that will work and then adapt it. And is there a reverse engineering to do there when you think about equity? Not just for products, but maybe about systems.
Yeah, so I want to say something I've been thinking about for a while, and this is probably obvious to most people, but I don't think we give ourselves recognition for what we have done. It is the work that we have done as a field. Ultimately, we have helped hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of households to actually have a better life. There are so many amazing programs on the ground that are helping households to maximize their income, that are helping them to feel a sense of control about their financial future. We should not discount any of that. And at the end of the day, someone recently said to me, so are you totally focused on, is what motivates you changing systems? And I said, to tell you the truth, I know on one side of my brain that's the intellectual way to go, but
Right.
You know what motivates me? It's the fact that we're actually making a difference in the lives of real people in real communities. So I think that's incredibly important. And I also think that coming back to this idea, we need to be advocates for those households and advocate for why have those households having more financial security is actually beneficial for the economy, is good public policy. And we need to humanize the issue. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has helped to humanize challenges and inequities that existed long before we even knew what COVID-19 was. And so I also think that we have a huge role to play in our field and in our sector, again, humanizing and helping to shape that these challenges is not an us versus them. I think what's complicated about the financial security sector, and one of the things that's different, is that the insecurity is actually felt. It's not just very low income populations. It's throughout the income spectrum, and we have a role to play. Again, raising it up, showing how this actually then impacts both our economic life, but also just our general quality of life in our country.
Yeah, I do think that we've really moved into I think the work on financial well-being in the broader spectrum of understanding well-being, right, has become just fundamentally a place where we're trying to fit our work in whether it's the financial inclusion work globally, whether it's work we're doing. I think that's just another big takeaway for us, is that the work of financial security, this is another reason we came to Aspen, right? It doesn't happen in a silo. It happens with education. It happens with healthcare. It happens with workforce. It happens with training. It happens with all sorts of other places where it manifests in people's lives, is as an enabling set of conditions for choice and managing risk. And I think you've said this too, and I would love to kind of maybe, as we close out, think about it from your role where you sit now. You manage both a large impact investing portfolio now and a broad philanthropic strategy. And so, and you've also really been the person all the time that said, yes, we've got to start to kind of meet people where they are and deal with how do you actually help people manage insecurity today? And I do think the field has done incredible work there. And I think we have even more tools now, but we also said it can't stop there, right? In that way, it's back to the future, that the future of well-being is some level of additional cushion and personal wealth that and security that enables people to make the choices for themselves and their families and their communities that is different. So you've been very good at saying, if all we ended up doing was helping people manage scarcity, we haven't pushed ourselves hard enough as a field. And as we come into a new administration, as we come into another 5-year horizon, with you sitting in the seat you sit in, what do you think your own unique role is going to be in pushing us there?
Yeah, well, I actually think that it's, we spend a lot of time in the philanthropic world talking about these very, how it's complicated, these complicated theories of change. I actually think that the complexity lies in the organizations that are either working on the policy front or directly in communities. I think that the complexity lies there. And one of the things that we need to do is make it easier for organizations to have the resources that they need, both to innovate from a programmatic standpoint, but also to be those change agents. So I think some of the best innovations are actually those that are really simple. And so I'm a big proponent, after many, many years of going deep with organizations. What are you doing? We're tracking the data, we're tracking the metrics. I think philanthropy needs to invest and provide more core operating support so organizations can do both the direct service and be in that change agent role. And also, frankly, have the space and the resources to come together so we can amplify our voice as a field and influence policy in a different way. And so if we don't change the way that we finance these efforts and the support these efforts, I think we're going to keep getting the same outcome. And then the second thing I'll just say is that it's not just the nonprofit community. I'm super excited. You mentioned the impact investing world. We have social entrepreneurs that now can be in the form of a nonprofit. They can be in the form of a for-profit, and even large corporations are becoming social entrepreneurs. And so maybe what we need to do also is to think about that social entrepreneurship framework and say, how do we just promote that and let that be I think the hallmark. If I look back on the next 20 years, the next 2 decades, I'm hoping that social innovation and social entrepreneurship, this will be an incredible age to be doing this work, because again, we're going through a social revolution where the status quo is not going to be accepted. And I'm excited about different sectors and the different roles that they can play in changing the status quo.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm excited about that as well. I think part of the fun of having a platform like Aspen is you can curate very unusual suspects to come together and realize they're having aligned insights about change in the world and how we drive it. So we'll be doing more of that. We're going to let speaking of which, we're going to let the next panel of change makers really kind of dig into the framework and the ways that they see themselves working together. And we'll be doing more of the same with you in years to come. So thank you, Brandy.
Thank you. And I do want to say one final small thing. We should not discount what we've accomplished to date and our own persistence. And I want to thank you, Ida, and your team and the many colleagues over the years, because the persistence and the constantly reinvigorating ourselves is such an important piece of all of this. So thank you for continuing to inspire all of us. It really does make a huge difference.
Likewise. I'll see you
Yeah.
soon. Thanks very
Yeah.
much. Thanks, everyone. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, wow. I was like writing so many notes, so many themes that came up we're going to dig into as we go throughout the program today. But, you know, especially this idea of horizontals versus verticals. And for those of you that have had a chance to dig into our paper, you'll see that's a big theme. The interaction of systems in families' lives and the ways we need to not just be aware of them, but think about how our work works because of them in a family's real life is essential. So with that, it's a perfect timing to turn this over to Genevieve Melford, because she's going to go into our framework and how we understand the sort of financial inputs and outputs and connections in a family's life, where we'll see through that, like you can start thinking as she's explaining it, all the different systems that are interacting in positive and negative ways that are allowing families to thrive, or frankly, so many of our families not to thrive. And we know that's unacceptable. So we've got to figure this out. All right, Jen, I'm turning it over to you, the brains behind our operation of this framework, to give us the Reader's Digest version of what we've developed here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joanna, and hello, everyone. I'm Genevieve Melford, Director of Insights and Evidence for Aspen FSP. And as you know, we've just released a new report on what our field has learned about household financial security in the past 5 years, and what we can all focus on over the next 5 years to make the biggest difference in people's financial lives. What I'm going to do in my remarks today is walk us through one part of that report, our new framework for financial security. We started this work by reviewing what Aspen, FSP, and others in our field have learned about financial security over the past 5 years, and I'll share a few of those key insights in just a moment. We then used this research to develop a framework to think about how money moves into and through households, and what the essential components are of the conditions that provide financial security. Doing this allows all of us to dig into each area of the framework, to apply it to the households that we serve, and to see how they're doing in each area, and where things aren't going well, to think about targeted approaches that could help. So just to quickly get us all on the same page, what do we mean by financial security? So when I say we have a framework for financial security, what are we trying to get at? So in our work, we've adopted the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's consumer-driven definition of financial well-being as our North Star. So you'll hear me using the terms financial security and financial well-being interchangeably. In a nutshell, financial security means having enough money and resources to comfortably meet your needs and obligations, protect you from shocks, pursue your goals, and enjoy life, both in the present and in the future. We think of financial security as an outcome goal, a state of being that exists when the key components are in place. So what are those components? Our review of research provides 3 key insights that really guide us here. The first is that cash flow, by which I mean a household's income minus their expenses, is the foundation of financial life. We see that income and expense changes are what drives changes in financial security over time. Things like gaining employment, a raise or a promotion, or simply more predictable and less volatile income are key factors found to increase financial health and well-being. On the other hand, losing a job or having hours reduced or facing a major medical or other expense are key predictors of declining financial health and well-being. The second insight is that liquid savings are a particularly valuable barometer of financial security. Early research by the CFPB found that liquid savings is the single variable most highly correlated with financial well-being, more so even than income. And to me, this actually makes intuitive sense because savings can be seen as both an outcome of having routinely positive cash flow and as a key form of financial stability in its own right. Not only do readily accessible savings protect against material hardship, but they also provide the material resources and the mental bandwidth for people to be able to weather smaller financial shocks without getting knocked off track from their work toward longer-term goals. And several recent studies confirm that indeed having higher levels of liquid saving protects against declines in financial health and well-being in the face of relatively limited kind of routine expense shocks. But the final insight is that despite the clear value of liquid savings, people actually cannot fully insure themselves all the time. And that means that safety nets are essential for everyone. So research shows that while liquid savings and other personal resources are incredibly valuable, they can't protect your financial security against larger or more persistent shocks like job loss or major medical expenses. One recent study found that even the most financially responsible people, the people whose behavior generally leads to higher financial security and well-being, even those folks are no more protected against the loss of financial security in the face of really major financial shocks than anyone else. So kind of even the most perfect financial behavior is not going to protect you when these major situations occur. So what that implies is that broader safety nets provided by government, employers, and other institutions are a necessary complement to the personal safety nets that people develop through their own ingenuity, efforts, and access to income-producing opportunities. And the importance of social safety nets is clearly enormous today. I mean, I know that to this audience, like, this is almost goes without saying, right? I mean, this spring, over 30 million people found themselves suddenly out of work. And that's an example of the kind of shock that virtually no one can protect themselves against. So it's a perfect example of what social safety nets are for. So moving from the insights to the framework, what we did is we took those three insights that I just talked through and we put them together with everything else we've learned over the past 5 years about things like income volatility, consumer debt, retirement security, and even the role that housing, caregiving, and other foundational arrangements play in people's financial lives. And what we see is that financial security rests on three interconnected pillars. The first pillar, routinely positive cash flow, is the foundation. When people reliably have more income from any source or combination of sources than the cost of meeting their basic needs, then they can pay their bills and still have extra money to put into savings. The second pillar is personal financial resources, your financial cushions and your wealth. And research shows that this pillar is critical for maintaining stability in the face of smaller income or expense shocks. And it also provides the resources that people can invest in family well-being, asset building, and economic mobility. When cash flow is reliably positive, people can build savings and wealth. You can see kind of the arrow going from cash flow to personal resources, right? When it's positive, you can just move the money over there. And you can use personal resources to invest in various ways to produce more income or reduce ongoing expenses, thereby increasing your cash flow and your choice and your security. So that's really a virtuous cycle. But when income does not reliably cover core cost of living expenses and allow for saving, right? So when your cash flow is not positive, the consequences are often unmanageable debt, late fees, and a whole host of other expenses that further weaken your cash flows in a vicious cycle of financial stress and instability, right? So when it's all working as it should, it's terrific, but when it's not, it can really spiral out of control, as we see for far too many people. So the third pillar is public and private benefits, and that's really equally critical to the first two. A wide range of public, employer, and third-party benefits, and we give a number of specific examples of what we mean by those kinds of benefits in our report. These benefits can provide households with income, they can reduce cost of living expenses, and they can support household wealth building and economic mobility. And they can therefore strengthen the other two pillars and protect households from risks too big to self-insure against. So the big takeaway here is that households need some combination of all three of these pillars to build and maintain financial security. They work together, so we have to consider the strength of all three of them. We really can't look at any one in isolation. Our new report provides a detailed assessment of the state of each of these three pillars. So let me just give you the big picture takeaway. The state of financial security in America is not good. And fundamentally, that's because many Americans don't have even the first pillar, routinely positive cash flow. And that's because cost of living expenses have risen for decades, but real wages for the typical worker have not, right? So that really puts a squeeze on household cash flows. And as a result, nearly half of all US households did not have income that exceeded their expenses last year in 2019, a problem made worse by the fact that average households have had persistently volatile incomes month to month for years. When we look at the state of public and private benefits, that third pillar, what we see is that they tend to provide far more robust support in reality to higher income households than to everyone else. So they're not delivering the broad set of foundational supports for financial security that we can see kind of in all of those arrows going up, all the ways they can boost the other two pillars. They're not really doing that for most households. And the result of these trends is that most households have too much debt and not enough savings, rather than the robust personal resources that are so critical for resilience and for mobility. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that with this framework in hand to diagnose and pinpoint exactly which components of financial security are missing, leaders in all sectors can boost access to different aspects of the pillars. Some leaders can boost labor income, others benefits income or capital income. They can reduce various cost of living expenses. They can help people capture net income and turn it into savings. That's not always the most straightforward thing for households to do. They can invest in household balance sheets and help households reduce burdensome debt. And they can provide group and social insurance to protect households in the face of life's big shocks. So there are so many things that different leaders can do. Making these ideas real will look different for different leaders, and it will likely require different ways of working together, with a laser focus on strengthening the systems that can boost household cash flows and balance sheets and protect households from the big risks outside their control. I'm excited to hear how our next speakers are thinking about these ideas. So with that, I'll turn it back to Joanna, who will lead our next discussion.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm back. You guys keep seeing me throughout the day per my promise or warning, depends on how you think of it. And as Jen mentioned, we're about to get into our panel. So I want to alert my panelists to do whatever last minute things you need to do before you turn on your video. But before I call them out, I want to explain at a much less in-depth level than Jen did about our priorities. So from the framework that Jen just explained beautifully to us, and if you see in the chat, Emmy referenced page 12 in our paper is where you can find it in case the graphics were hard to see on your computer. We actually came up with 4 principles that I'd love for you guys to read around what are sort of our values and approach that surround these kind of 4 directional coordinates as we think of them, of what we need to focus on. The first is that in our work in the next 5 years, our work, your work, our colleagues' work, other fields' work, like all of this work together that will bring economic dignity, we need to focus on how life is too expensive, right? Jen talked about this. There is a balance sheet problem where a lot of the basic core expenses in a family's life, housing, healthcare, education, dependent care, even the debt service families have to pay every single month on the consumer debt they have, it's too much. And frankly, it's unsustainable the way it is. So attention around the fundamentals that need to be affordable and accessible. The second is boosting household income. You know, if one thing Jen has given to me in my last 5 years is the importance of positive cash flow and how we have to start from there. Income, as you all know from your own income streams, can come from work, but we also see systemic pay inequities there. And of course, from benefits that Jen really went into. And we have a whole big portfolio of work called Benefits 21 that's looking deeply into that. So that's around income. You know, those of us that are asset field people, not everyone on this call are, but for those of us that are, we started in a place thinking about wealth and ownership. Now we live in a country that has millions of families in net debt. So what does that mean to a wealth agenda? And how do we get to a wealth agenda that really is inclusive and thinks deeply about racial equity? And, Ida, our executive director that you've heard from twice now, she loves to compare things to climate. So I'll do that here too, where for climate change, we have timelines, we have specific numbers. We know how to hold ourselves accountable to those goals, whether or not we're reaching them. we need that same level of purpose, of urgency, of clarity around a wealth agenda in this country. And lastly, this is a systems conversation, right? And so we're used to thinking about financial inclusion in one set of systems, the system that Brandy works in, the system of banks and credit unions and financial services. But other kinds of needs families have become financialized in our country over time. And so those systems need to be examined and worked on as well. So healthcare systems, higher education systems, the criminal justice system. And so we need to have a broader definition of what are the systems we work on and what does financial inclusion mean for those. So keep all that system stuff in your head, reference our paper if I went through it too fast, but I gotta get these panelists on because they are too awesome for me to keep babbling and not have them join me. So can Wole Coaxum from Mobility Capital Finance, Jason Fickner from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. We have Alejandra Montoya Boyer, the Associate Program Director at the National Association of Counties and their Resilient Economies and Communities Program, and Claudia Sam, Stay-at-Home Macro Consulting Program, join us right now. Oh, you guys are already here. You're way fast with your video, faster than I was when I was practicing. So welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Really excited to have you here. Let me make sure you guys are all unmuted because I want to have like a free flowing, let's get it all out kind of conversation. But let me go ahead and just kick us off with a question. We've heard a lot over the last, let's see, we've been in a program for about 45 minutes. We've heard Ida and Brandy kind of speak at the high level about how did we get here? What are the role of leaders? I was fascinated about what Brandy thinks is the role of philanthropy going forward and kind of the trust and investment in practitioners. Jen kind of brought us to the household unit and the way all these things have to function right with systems. I'm wondering, like, what is your reaction to this? Is there something big we're missing in how, and you heard me say the priorities, let me say that too, like directionally where we feel like we need to go based on all of this and the wisdom from those around us who have informed our process. What is missing in it for you? What resonates the most? What are we still not gotten quite right around how families are living, to bring real economic dignity to them, that we need our 500 people listening to know so they can be strong, good leaders with all of us? Maybe I'll kick it to Wole to start. Is that okay with you, Wole?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and first I want to thank you for the opportunity for being here in this very important conversation, and kudos to Aspen for leading the charge here in this way. From my vantage point, one of the key pieces, and I'm not sure you're missing it, I just want to emphasize it, right, which I think is really around, I think the paradigm is shifting a little bit in that for many of us, historically, the pathway to addressing the wealth gap has been around home ownership. And there have been some structural things that have kept that from happening, and particularly in communities of color. And as you look at this over time, the percentage of home ownership in 2020 is not significantly better than it was after the Fair Housing Act was put in place in the mid to late 60s. And so that forces us to think about, are there other ways to drive the closing of the wealth gap, some structural changes? And I've become a big proponent of entrepreneurship, quite frankly. And I think because of this move into the gig economy that I think is probably underrepresented in some of our numbers, it gives individuals an opportunity to take more ownership of their particular lives and was forced to do so, in ways of thinking about that as a way to help move the needle on that. And how do we measure that and how do we think about it? But I'm very convinced that the flows of capital in terms of what put people at risk and in jeopardy financially, particularly folks that are already on the knife's edge, find themselves really trying to think about other more innovative ways to take care of themselves and their families. And I think this entrepreneurship gig economy component is something we can influence, control, and maybe think about as a way to drive the change where we know is so necessary.
Yeah, well, it's really, to me, if I'm, reflecting back on our framework and the priorities, that has such a deep intersection with the benefits part of income, right? So you can drive up the income part of income and maybe some of the ownership part, but thinking about these intersecting systems that need to work, especially for folks on their own, to really turn that opportunity into real wealth and asset for them. Alejandra, tell me, what do you think? What's hot on your mind on this topic? Like Wole just shared with us, so we want to get in the mix in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're identifying all of these challenges and failures for families and households, which are all absolutely accurate. And what worries me is that we're not just failing households and families, we're failing other systems. The local governments, county governments are really struggling right now. We are expecting a $202 billion loss of revenue and increase in expenditures over the next 2 years. And counties don't know how they're gonna fill that gap. And counties and cities and counties are on the front lines of this response, both the public health response and the economic response. We provide programs to low-income families, cash assistance, all of these necessary functions of local governments that protect families and households from slipping further into poverty, from losing their homes, we're also we create jobs as local governments, and these systems are failing us right now. The pandemic is highlighting it, but over time we've diminished the ability for local governments to perform the very necessary services that they're providing to folks. And it's worrisome. I think we're seeing some trickle down failures, and without local government support and aid, families and households are not going to be able to bounce back from this.
Yeah, well, Alejandra, let's not pin that. Let's keep that going with other speakers for you, Claudia, and Jason, to add in what you want. But the thought that I'm pinning to make sure we get back to you are, what are the institutions that we need to make sure these systems function properly? And if I'm hearing you right, and also what I just am observing in this country as well, is some of our most necessary institutions are not in their strongest position right now, and themselves are suffering from system failures, making it harder. Claudia, I see you nodding, and I want to know what is on your mind in this conversation?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely reinforce that we have systemic problems, whether there's systemic racism or there's systemic issues in just the administration of the programs that we have on the books. So I think that is important. I did want to reaffirm a point that Jen made in terms of people need money. Right. So I have been very focused in both my work at the Federal Reserve and now work advising Congress that you have got to get the labor market functioning for all people. Full employment is a glorious thing. We were not there in February, but we were so much closer than we had been in decades. We need to get back there. We need to get to a better place that recognizes that many people were still suffering before millions more got to the place of suffering. I think getting money in people's hands, and this goes back to an earlier point, it's about respecting them, giving them power to do what's best for their families, what's best for their communities. DC can print the money and get it out, but I think it's very important to understand that we will never understand what really is needed, because it's very unique to the circumstances and the individuals in the parts of the country. And the last thing I'll say before you can hear Jason's 2 cents on this is you all are so polite. I'm angry. I'm angry at the COVID crisis. I think it puts an extra emphasis on all the wonderful work that you have been doing for years, but I am, because y'all told me this is a public event, I'm trying to keep it, professional. But I just think so much of this crisis has really shown the systemic weaknesses we have in the country. And the silver lining is it has shown how, if we get relief to people, if we help the hardest hit, it works, right? We know how to help people. We just have to do it.
You have to have the will to do it. No, I mean, thank you for saying that I'm being polite. That is hard. My inner rage is there, hidden by my bright pink blazer. But we all have a right, and families themselves have a right to be angry. And it comes out in our political system, which is one of the institution systems also deeply at risk these days. Jason, I was going to ask you a more specific question about which system do you think are you most interested in fixing? But I actually am just curious, like where we're all riffing to, like if you think we're missing something, or what is another key nuance to understand as we get deeper into so what are we going to do about this at a practical level?
Well, I actually can answer all three of those at the same time, which is great.
Yeah.
So the first thing I think is, and to go back to sort of one of the pillars Aspen's talking about now, the framework is cash flow. And Claudia's mentioned this as well, Wooly, and so has Alejandra. I think one of the things we've learned in the last several years, especially with the financial diaries that came out in 2017, is sort of the episodic nature of poverty, if you will. And that for a long period of time, we have sort of mischaracterized those who are unable to save, don't have savings or emergency savings, as those who are just consistently poor or unwilling or over consumers. And what we find is that it's not the case, and that people have jobs, they just have income shocks. They lose a job temporarily, or they have an expense like a car breaks down. They have to come up with $500 for car repair. They don't have it. And that then sets them behind. And so we need to sort of understand the episodic nature of cash flow and how to fill that in. And that goes to a lot of things that Claudia's been working on about having better counter-cyclical policies. And I think that's important to bring up. The other thing is thinking about sort of the nuance of this. I do think there are some institutions that need to be changed wholesale, but we shouldn't forget that we can make some small scale changes that have a large impact. So for example, Wooly mentioned the idea of housing, and how housing is a roadmap to wealth for so many people, but we don't do a good enough job helping minorities get housing. Let's think about having a first-time home buyers credit nationally to help people buy a home, as opposed to thinking about expanding the tax deductibility of interest. Let's look at a tax credit. Same thing goes for our savings. I think our institutions now, our tax code that helps promote retirement savings is great for people like me. It works wonderfully, but doesn't work for everybody. It basically is an upside down system that allows for tax deferrals. So higher income people in higher tax brackets get a better benefit, and those who are lower income, who may not even be paying federal income taxes, but paying payroll taxes, don't get a break. I'm not saying throw the system out, but let's allow those at lower incomes who don't benefit from a tax deferral to take a tax credit instead to save. And then reimagine the saving system so we have on top of it like a sidecar savings account. So that money can go in tax deferred, maybe up to $1,000 that can be used for emergency expenses. Everything over that $1,000 gets thrown into your IRA or your 401k. And if you draw down the emergency savings and you refill that first before it goes back into a retirement plan. I think that's sort of the nuance. And I'll add one more thing about the institution, because Claudia kind of got to this too. It's sort of the failure of imagination. I don't think anyone really thought we were going to have 30 million unemployed, especially so quickly. And if you look back to just before the pandemic, we had a very, very low unemployment rate, around 3%. And at that point in time, states were not going to spend their hard-earned tax dollars and scarce dollar resources shoring up a UI system when they had such low unemployment. And now we're stuck trying to get money out in a system that cannot handle it. It's like pushing a pig through a python.
System, yeah.
And that's the system where we need to actually now improve our UI system and plan for how that could be done for other things, including maybe paid parental leave, better UI, counter-cyclical payments when the federal government needs to get to the states. That needs to be robust, but the states have to invest in the capacity to do so. And that's where the federal government can come in also with some resources to help do that.
And some incentives, I think, to do it right. I have to ask Wooly a question to follow up, because I think he might disagree about systems and if there are things we can fix or not. But there was something I did, well, now I'm forgetting what I wanted to bring up. So let's just go to Wooly about that. I mean, when we were all prepping for the call there, we were having this debate, which I think is important to hear about. Are these systems just doing what they were supposed to do? And so can they be fixed? Which ones do you think can be fixed? This is a systems level conversation. And I promised everyone I would get in this quote from Mariah Carey. So participants or people watching, please do not laugh at me. Wisdom comes from many places, as we know at Aspen, and how we all really should be approaching the world, as Claudia was saying, like families are the deepest wisdom in their own lives of what they mean. And Mariah Carey said, we've been socialized to believe that poverty is a personal failure rather than our systems failing us. So that strikes true in this conversation. And I'm actually wondering if we are challenging through our priorities in this framework that we have to not like abandon the Band-Aid patchwork individual work happening, but we can't keep doing that without systems change. Are we talking about new ones or these ones? And I'm curious, Wooly, what you think about this.
Yeah, and kudos to you for weaving in a Mariah Carey quote.
It's the holiday season, and she is the queen of the holidays. So you
in this conversation. But I do think that it goes back to what we've been talking about earlier. There's some structural things that are in place that have created a disproportionate impact in terms of certain communities in this country. And if you think about from a policy perspective, which I do think that government policy could be a proxy for systems that are created, if you think about it from historically, the GI Bill and how that benefited some people and not other people. If you think about the policy that Jason talked about in terms of tax deduction for mortgages, how that benefited a certain group of people and not other people. And so I think that over time, if you put those structures in place, you could argue that the GI Bill was very successful in terms of driving home ownership, creating the middle class in this country that continues to this day. And yet, if you look at the statistics, that the average African American has 1/10 of the wealth of his or her white counterpart. And it's not very different, unfortunately, for the Latinx community. And then think about the risk that someone in the middle class today, born into the middle class in the Black community, over his or her lifetime may fall out of the middle class. That says to me that maybe there needs to be a reevaluation of some of the systems and policies. And I often think about, do you create something like a GI Bill for the Black community, or do you create a GI Bill for rural communities where there's intentional dollars being put to work to drive homeownership, to drive access to higher education, to drive entrepreneurship, to retool people's skill sets. And we know it works. And the other thing that the pandemic has demonstrated is the economy can shift relatively quickly to get large numbers of dollars out to vulnerable people. And so there's somewhere in there, in my mind, that may become a framework that we need to maybe reevaluate and reconsider as we come up with new paradigms that can have different impacts on communities that have been negatively impacted by traditional paradigms.
So do you guys, and I have no specific person to ask this to, so whoever gets to the mic first, do you think we need new ideas, or we need the will for things like, because I often talk about the GI Bill, Wole, as like one of the most successful programs in probably the world, right, in the history of trying to build wealth. It's just that it was targeted, but it did what it was intending to do. Do you think we need new programs or will for programs? Or I'm curious, like, because I want to get us to a place of, Jason already like beat me to it and listed his like 3 favorite ideas. So I'll make him say them again just so we get it back in the mix. But I want to get to a place of that. Like, practically speaking, what do you very smart people think are the places to start within those 4 priorities that we outlined? But are they new, or are they will? And if it's will, what do we do about that? And I don't know who wants to jump in on this first.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So I think there's an absolute issue of political will. And we see that right now. I mean, Jason talked about the need to really tie relief to the conditions people are facing. So I've been a big proponent of what's called automatic stabilizers, like keep the money flowing until the unemployment rate comes down, right? And like down for everyone, not white men and white women alone. Bring everyone back from the margins, and because they deserve it, right? And so we need creative ways to work around the fact that we are a divided country. I mean, people have the right to their vote. They have a right to have different visions, but we also need to set aside, visions for different directions we can go from just like basic needs, like treating people humanely and helping them in a crisis. I am not a fan of reinventing the wheel, right? Like, we have programs on the books that if they were administered properly and with a desire to actually do what is said we were doing, right? Congresses past have agreed, or, in how different agencies are supposed to fulfill their mandates. Like, let's just do it. and then space for creativity, right? But I'm very wary of us trying to do really grandiose things in the middle of a fire. I think there's a big plus to experimentation, letting states and communities also think about, and absolutely getting the private sector involved. Like no one entity is going to solve this.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll second that too, because one of the things, and we'll even mention the idea of entrepreneurship. I think sort of blending those together is letting states and localities be more creative in entrepreneurship, the laboratories of democracy, if you will. The federal government has a role in funding it, and we let the states and localities figure out what works. And what I would say also is, and this is, we need to be targeted. So something that goes through, for example, for, and Claudia mentioned this too, for people who need it, we need to do some sort of help and assistance. And that can be done through a better, robust unemployment insurance system. But I would not be in favor of sending everyone a $1,200 check, for example, because that's not targeted. And it's just, in some ways, it's not necessarily a good use of money. And so we're trying to tie it to employment, or trying to tie it to the margins where we need to do it through a better system and better targeting. And I think that's an important nuance to bring forward, at least in the time of the pandemic.
Well, go ahead, Alejandra, and then we'll get you back in.
I don't want to be the Debbie Downer here, but I do worry about when it comes to talking about and dismantling racism, though, we don't have a lot of examples of success. There are communities that have been working on operationalizing race equity, at least at the governmental level, for years, and we have very limited showing for that. And we're starting to see more in the pandemic and in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. We saw over 50 counties pass racism as a public health crisis resolutions, which trigger implementable things to do with dollars behind it. And also at the city and state level. This is not just at the county level. But operationalizing race equity is very different than, I think political will is certainly a problem. And when it comes to race equity, there's no question. I mean, we just went through an election that highlights that. We also don't have a lot of, at least governmental examples. There are local communities, there are CBOs, there are organizers out there that are doing the work. But when we talk about scalable, transferable, operationalizing race equity, I worry that maybe some of it is these systems are working as they're intended, and so maybe these aren't the right systems.
Yeah, listen, that's not a Debbie Downer. That is very real and practical, and just has me reflecting on our principles, which I didn't go through really on this presentation, but again are in our paper for those of you who have downloaded it, where one of the principles is deeply about an anti-racist approach. And that the not knowing is part of that approach, the not assuming we know how to do this. One of my colleague, Tim, recently published a blog on our website that talked about how to get this recovery right. And one of the, I think, kind of darkest statistics is actually about how many Americans, especially Black and Brown Americans, we were in the most insane economic time of our country the last decade or so, but it was essentially wealthless for most Americans, and especially for Black and Brown Americans. And so that economic approach wasn't, to your point of how do we know which ones of these approaches will do it right, and how do we embed this properly? Anyhow, lots to think about. I'm not being perfectly eloquent in my thoughts, but I deeply appreciate your comments. Also, someone wrote in the comment how much they love your glasses. I wanted you to know that. Well, you were eager to get in, and I want to know.
No, it's a little bit like being in church. As I hear ideas, I just started nodding my head and getting into the moment here. But I do think that there is a role. I think, as you laid out in the paper and in this discussion, there's no one group of individuals or one group of institutions that are going to solve this problem. And I think having these kinds of conversations to lay it out on the table is very helpful. Some of the things we're doing in our work is, we're spending some time with the idea of financial services as infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. And so having financial services as infrastructure, our strategy is working particularly with cities and counties because they are the laboratories of democracy. If you're able to use a city or county infrastructure to say, we're going to make banking available to everyone for free. I mean, just think of how novel that concept would be. And that would actually, you think about, if you look at the alternative financial services industry, which is check cashers, pawn shops, payday lenders, if you're able to put them out of business, that would give, people who use those services almost $200 billion back in their pocket, right? And obviously, those institutions are there for a reason, because they're making up for market failure. But I do think it allows us to think creatively about innovation that can fulfill sort of the objectives that we're talking about, actually give people a raise, quite frankly, from doing nothing else but having better financial services as infrastructure through cities. That then allows you to begin the conversation in very tangible terms of closing the wealth gap, because you're giving people the basic tools that they need. So there's a private sector component to that. There's a philanthropic component to that. There's an elected official component to that. There's a think tank component. So you put all those things together, that's where the optimism comes from. And maybe as an entrepreneur, I just naturally have to be optimistic. But I think if we're able to pull that together, then we've got a chance to make some real meaningful change for the communities we care about.
Yeah, I mean, and what I think is so interesting about that is you're essentially building a new system. We're debating here about what needs to be new versus what can be fixed, and are we being naive about what exists? And Alejandra's good point about that, but without really saying we're building a whole new system, you're building a whole new system. I have to say I'm a cross between Wole and Claudia, where I'm both optimistic and have inner rage that I always want to let out. I don't know where the rest of you are on our personality spectrum, but it will come out in the last 10 minutes we have of this conversation. Wole, I'm going to use your comments as a great transition, because what you did was provide like a very practical systems level, Mariah Carey would love it, kind of solution, Mariah Carey branded, of what to do. And I'm wondering, Jason, you mentioned a bunch, so I'm gonna let you pick one, but I'm actually gonna ask you, no, I'm not letting you pick. We did talk a little bit about, about social insurance when we prepared, and Jen brought this up. And so I wanna make sure we give it a minute here too. And then Claudia and Alejandra, I also want some solutions from you guys, but I'm gonna pivot to you, Jason. Jen made a very good case that there are just certain things for which self-insuring doesn't work, and the pandemic is a perfect example. There was no real way, like even if you were the best saver who saved what you were advised to do, that you could have predicted needing this many months of money if you were one of the people who lost their jobs and lost their healthcare and then had costs sort of spiraling. So I'm wondering if I could make you choose social insurance as one policy, a systems thing we need to talk a little bit about that.
So I do think, and again, there's this old mistake in public management that we're always preparing for the next crisis by comparing it to the previous crisis or the one you're currently in. So realizing there might be a lack of imagination. I do think that the UI system we have is a good social insurance system. It just is not robust enough to handle the current pandemic. And that if we invested, and that's federal government giving states dollars to upgrade their systems, so that it can handle live wage reporting, understand who's unemployed, and have quick access to do things over the internet, that, to Claudia's point, we could get out money quickly through a counter-cyclical program, which if someone lost their job, or even if they didn't have a job and they had to start filing for a new federal program, they could do it through a state-sponsored system that was more robust. And if we just put more time and energy into that infrastructure, we could have something then that for the future sort of crises come out is a better way to get money out to people quickly through the states, but the federal government can support it financially. And that was the problem we had with the CARES Act, is that we wanted to get money out quickly, but we didn't know how much. So $600 was just kind of thrown out there. We didn't have a way to say, what is a person currently making? What's a good wage replacement? So it was kind of done, haphazardly. We need to be more thoughtful, but that starts with a better, robust UI system. And I think we need to basically start putting a lot of money and investing in that.
But you think building off an existing system, not necessarily needing to create a new program?
Well, you can have a new program that works through the UI infrastructure, but just to give you an idea, I think still 14 states use COBOL for their infrastructure programming. And that's if anyone here knows what COBOL is, that'll be amazing. I mean, it's an old programming language that I think kids today wouldn't even understand what it actually looks like. So it needs to be modernized. And again, if you have I know what it is too, but if you have a modernized system, you can make it robust. And think about UI. If we want to do a paid leave program for for maternity or paternity leave, or even for caregiving or for taking care of an elderly parent. How does that money get out? You could do it if you had a better, robust unemployment insurance infrastructure.
That investment allows you to leverage other kinds of programs. And we did talk about how these like household expenses, including caregiving, is one of the things really deeply holding families back. We have a few minutes left to go. I want to make sure I get your two, bright light ideas out there. It can be federal government, it can be private sector, it can be county government. Alejandra, are you ready to roll with your idea?
Sure. It's not my idea. Counties are doing this across the country. We need to get money into people's hands, cash assistance, rental assistance, utility. People need to pay their bills. Cities and counties are doing it, but we also need to focus on who gets those funds. It's targeted for low-income communities, but particularly my home county of Bernalillo, for example, Bernalillo County, New Mexico, is specifically targeting undocumented people, indigenous people, and low-income people at large. And then the other community that's really struggling is obviously small business owners. Loudoun County, Virginia is in their 5th round of small business relief. They're particularly targeting businesses with 10 people or 10 employees or fewer, small businesses that are owned by people of color and women-owned businesses. And money in hand is, at the end of the day, that's the solution for me.
Yeah, that totally makes, that's what evidence says, and we have quite a bit of research that says that too. Claudia, do you have a non-pandemic related one, or is yours pandemic related too?
Well, both. So I'll go back to Jason's. I think that the unemployment insurance system has been in disregard for decades. This is an amazing program. It was founded in the Great Depression, right? Like, let's learn our lessons here. Like, this is very important always, but especially in crises. And to tie it to your focus on financial security, there's research that shows that a supportive jobless benefits, and right now this can be having extra weeks of benefits, the extra amount of benefits, the expanded eligibility for jobless benefits that Congress put in place in the CARES Act. All 3 of those were in the CARES Act. They have or will expire very soon, but we know that those extra benefits in a time where it is very hard to find a job mean something, and they mean something most to women, people of color, and young adults. And the reason this ties to financial stability is those are 3 groups that don't typically have a lot of savings set aside. They can't wait for a job to come back that is a really good match to their skills and experience. We need them to be able to wait. We all benefit from people being in jobs that let them achieve their full potential. And so that's just a way that these 2 interact, that you need a strong support when people, no fault of their own, suddenly have no paycheck. And you want to support them until they are able to come back into the workforce in a way that they want and we all want to see them flourish.
Yeah, that's great. Jason's clapping. I'm trying to read comments on the side as I go, so if people think I'm doing weird things, that's why. Listen, we're out of time, which is a real shame, because what a delight to have you guys all together. We're going to have to get like a weekly cocktail hour. And I appreciate that we hit on all the principles. We talked about wealth, we talked about expenses, we talked about income. We're all in pandemic world, so it's hard to not be when we're thinking about solutions. Families are in trouble, as Jen said, and it's unconscionable and we can't let it continue. So I appreciate why we're focused on the now. I just want to call out that I see in all of the stuff you guys have been talking about, systems change, will being built, improvements in families' lives that will be future, that we can build off of and can be future oriented too. So I'm excited about those thoughts. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate your time, thoughts, and energy. I'm going to ask you to turn off your cameras now while we get to our last segment of the day. And you all well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I am blown away by that conversation. My brain is moving so fast that I'm trying to even remember the transition that we have next. But I just looked at my cheat sheet, and gosh, if you guys are still with us, which I know you all are, because how could you have turned us off? This is going to be such a great segment today. we talked a lot about kind of the vision, about the particulars of the framework. What does that mean in terms of the coordinates that we have to work towards, the 4 priorities I talked about? We just got into some very specific, though big because it's systems, ideas. And now we're going to get back to who we are as people. You know, this is at Aspen, we care deeply about who we are, about our values, about what motivates us, about how we can come to the table to put on, you know, our like fanciest hat and build a better country. You know, what is it that I wake up every day to do and what's in my power to do? And that's what I want to, again, I would invite you, but that feels too soft. That's what I want to really urge you and challenge you to do along with us around these financial security problems. And to help us reflect and think about that, we have an amazing guest joining us, Danielle Christine Toussaint. She's had many, many titles over her career. She's worked to advance education, economic opportunity, racial equity. She's the founder of She Thinks Purple and is currently one of my colleagues at the Aspen Institute as the mortgage communicator in residence with the Ascend program. So I'm going to turn my video and mute off and let her just talk to us. And I am excited and ready to be inspired and to have her help us with our last segment of the day. Thanks, everyone.
I will never forget my first media advisory meeting with a New York Times reporter. At the time, I was a junior communications associate working for a startup advocacy organization in my home state of Connecticut. And as only the 5th hire, it was already intimidating enough. My 2 bosses were incredibly accomplished and impressive men. One was a Rhodes Scholar and Harvard grad. The other was a PhD researcher who led all of the communications and was Georgetown educated. In the days leading up to this meeting, I did all of the normal stuff. I poured through our data, I collected talking points, and I did briefing conversations with both of them. My job was to make 2 already stellar and impressive people look even more so in front of this reporter in the hopes that we would not only get a great story, but this would lead to future opportunities. And on the morning of the meeting, I obviously was the person who was putting all of those perfectly collated packets on the boardroom table, letting her into the space, offering her water, and then sitting and waiting for it all to get started because my job, I thought, was done. Now I was just going to be a listener and a learner. The conversation started to go really well. We were poring over the data and thinking about sort of what this all meant. There's an achievement gap. It's affecting the lowest income families in our state and across the nation. What to do about it? And I can remember looking at some point at a reporter and just seeing in her eyes that while all of this was very interesting, there was not a story here. And at some point, maybe as sort of her last ditch effort to save the meeting, she looks over to me and just simply says, "Danielle, what do you think about all of this?" And completely unprepared to have to speak at all in this meeting, I just took a breath and said the first and most honest thing that came to my mind. When I look at all of these numbers, I remember that there's a name behind every single one. I was one of these names. My cousins are these names. The friends and family who still have kids in these very underperforming schools, they are the names. And every time I remember that these are not just numbers, they're not just pie graphs and charts, they're people, it really reminds me of why I'm here and what I hope becomes true. I'm Danielle Christine Toussaint. I am a communicator and a storyteller and a strategist, and I am delighted that I get to be here at Aspen Institute every day supporting incredible leaders like Ann Mosley, and specifically as the mortgage communicator in residence for the Ascend program, all the rest of our team. And I got here after working for several years leading communication strategy with mission-driven executives and entrepreneurs in my own practice, She Thinks Purple. And I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation today because it couldn't possibly be more timely and resonant. I want to congratulate Ida and the rest of the team who've worked for 5 years to get us to a place where we have such a strong and clear set of recommendations for what it will take to help every family be on a path to greater prosperity, where it unlocks mobility and where it increases just our capacity to have financial security. That's what this program is all about, and it's so deeply personal to me. But after we sit and listen to really smart people talk, there can be this tendency to say, yes, I know I must do something, and then this instant paralysis that sets in around what exactly that something should be. You see, we might see ourselves in the smallness of who we are in comparison to the bigness of these societal problems, and simply just go back to doing whatever we think was good enough without really asking ourselves if there's a bigger bet out there for us to make. So I just want to spend the balance of my time talking with you from the perspectives that I've held in the manyest places that I've been about what I believe is the biggest bet we can make collectively right now. And it's in people. And not just any people, but 3 specific groups of people. The first is on leaders themselves. And when I say this, I'm not talking about somebody else. I'm talking about you, the specific human that is sitting in your particular seat. You are the person that you need to bet on. There have been so many conversations, particularly in the past several months, that can feel so fraught. It seems sometimes like there's something that's up for grabs and we don't quite know what it is. It feels sometimes as though you have to have a qualification to be able to speak on building a more inclusive and diverse and an empowered environment. And I might imagine that for some of you, it feels like there's a referendum on your exact leadership just because of who you are and what you look like. So I want to be really specific. White leaders, men, women, and those who may not identify with lower income families and peoples and who have not walked that path, we still need you to be right where you are and to bet on yourself as leaders. We don't need you to get up from the table to make room for others. We simply need you to use your power to extend that table, to add more chairs, and to ensure that as you look around and engage with the other people at that table, there is full representation of our humanity. That every single voice is seen and is celebrated and is validated at every turn. You, being who you are, is more than enough to meet this moment. And we don't ask you to do it alone. I also believe it's very important for us to think about the room that I introduced you to, that I was in as a junior communications associate. You see 2 white men who with a lot of power decided to simply share that space. And in so doing, opened up an opportunity for me to be seen and validated in my experience to help inform our larger strategy. It did lead to really incredible opportunities. That weekend, after the reporter left, she ran a story, and that story was called Owning Up to Failure. And in her column, she talked not just about the problem, but about our need to collectively own the responsibility we all shared for no longer holding up just the exceptions like myself, but looking at the greater majority and how we could work in the benefit for all. So it mattered that that power was shared, that the table was extended, that there was enough room for everyone. The next group of people that I want to invite you to bet on are the unlikely partners. I was the unlikely partner in that room. Nobody, including me, expected to hear my voice. And yet, because I was there, it opened up an opportunity for us to think about something very differently and from a voice most proximate to the problem that we were trying to solve. So who in your organization are the unlikely partners that you need to bring into the room? It's often that we ask the people that we expect should have a solution what they think about a problem. But I want to ask us, what would it look like if we ask the people that we least expected to have a solution what they thought about the problems we were solving? We might open up opportunities that we've been missing all along because we choose to do something a little differently than we've always done it. And that's what happened in that conversation. And there are so many more people just like me sitting in your organizations that if you just turn to them and ask them what they think, might surprise you. The last group of people that I want to invite us to bet on are my peers. And this is not just a plug to ask you to hire more communications people in your financial institutions and policy circles, but I truly believe that it is important that we bet right now more than ever on the storytellers. And here's what I mean by that. Not in the sort of antiquated, sort of ancient knowledge storyteller holder of all communal things, but I truly mean this in the sense of the people that are willing to ask questions, to not just take numbers at face value, to remember that there are always names behind these numbers, to keep us focused and curious about how we can create a different type of solution for a different type of person simply because we account for the fullness of people in the complexity of their lives. Those are the storytellers. They keep us honest. They keep us inspired, and they keep us focused on what really matters at the end of the day. So you've heard an abundance of conversation, lots of voices, lots of perspectives, and I just want to ask you, are you willing to make the big bet? Are you willing to bet on your own leadership, even when it's uncomfortable, even when there's uncertainty, and to trust that you are in the seat you need to be in and that you don't have to do the work alone? Are you willing to bet on unlikely partners, to turn to the junior person in the room and ask, what do you think about this? Are you willing to bet on the storytellers, the people that will help you to stay focused on what is more than just the trend, but the actual real people that are behind all of this, to care about their lives as they live them every day? If so, I believe that we could be back here in 5 years, having amazing conversations that hold up the impact that we've achieved together. Super proud of all that we've done because we were willing to bet on something at the moment when we needed it most. So thank you for letting me spend this time with you.
Okay, well, I don't know about you all, but I literally have chills up my back. Thank you, Danielle, so much. I will be thinking hard about that question of who to bet on. The one question I didn't get to in my panel, because we were just having such a lively conversation, I didn't want to end it and interrupt it, but was, who are they, the 4 folks I was talking to, when they leave that meeting with us, going to go home and call or text or send this footage to say, you got to come in with me? You know, who are we going to trust? Who are we going to invite? Those of us who have the tables that we get to sit, the way that we get to add credibility to experts, the way that we get to funnel, as Brandy said, like choices about resources. My goodness, what power that is. Danielle was amazing. I see in the chat that all of you guys are talking about that too. What a really beautiful way to end this session. So thank you all for being with us for an hour and a half today. In our dream non-COVID pandemic world, this would have been a day-long celebration. We'd all be having drinks right now, getting to know each other better, planning, conspiring, doing all the fun things to change the world together. And we can't do that in this world like this, but I hope that doesn't mean you won't figure out a way to engage with us, because I'm certain I will figure out a way to find all 500 of you and do my invitation, my gentle invitation to join us in this work. I want to do a couple quick thank yous before I wrap us up for the day. First, enormous thank you again to Citi for not just this investment of the work that we presented today and the event that you guys have been watching, but also they've invested in us in other projects all along. We have many other funders who are our deep partners, really, also listed on our website that, you know, without them, it's not just that my salary wouldn't get paid, though that's true. But it's more that the work that we are doing together with you all to bring real economic dignity to families could not happen. And so the amount of gratitude I have for that is huge. Finally, and almost the most important thanks of the day are for our team, Elizabeth Fiverito, Emmy Urban, and Megan Poljak, who are have been behind the scenes. Literally, Emmy is on this Zoom with us behind the screen, making all of this happen, the paper, the event, the fabulous people, getting Danielle to speak with us. And they are treasures and important parts of our team too, even though we don't always hear from them publicly. So everyone, my send off to you is to make sure you download the paper. Kind of like during the election when everyone was saying, you've got to find 3 people to vote. You've got to find 3 people to send this to. You need to find me before I find you. And also, let's ask ourselves those questions Danielle left with us about who are we going to bet on and what are we going to bet on for ourselves? And let's make this world like really a better place in a real, genuine, durable way for all families. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.